Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the T-62. Now I know this is just another tank review on yet another Soviet medium tank, right? Well, not quite. The T-62 is very unique amongst Russian tanks in my opinion. It is the last Soviet medium tank that we have currently in the game, or main battle tank, at rank 5 with a battle rating of 8.0. And it is equipped with the very unique 115mm smoothbore U-5TS cannon. And it's all about the gun and the ammunition that sets it apart from its Soviet cousins, so to speak. Now, this tank review, I'm sorry about that, is divided into, let's say, 5 sections. The first part is the armor review, showing its strengths and weaknesses, and also letting you know everything there is to know about the interior, which is quite important. Then I give you a full rundown in comparison of the mobility to its main opponents, followed up by a main comparison to its opponents on the battlefield. And then there is also a tactics section. And while I do all this, I will let you see some gameplay in the background. First of all, a few matches in arcade, which are quite funny. And then there are also some Ace Tanker gameplay in realistic mode, so stay tuned. So, first of all, let's talk about the armor. And the armor is very similar to the T-54s in its shape and thickness. The lower hull is 100mm thick, sloped backwards at 55 degrees. Effective thickness is around 200mm. This is not good enough to save you from the Yak Tiger and the Mouse APHE shell, like with the upper hull, where it's the same story. While it is more heavily angled, then they shoot a little bit from above, especially in close quarters, and then it's not good enough. However, when you angle it a little bit, you even can reliably bounce, or semi-reliably bounce, Leopard's APDS shells. Then the side of the tank, 80mm thick, so that's again a very good side armor for a medium tank. And the lower part, a very small section actually, is just 20mm thick, and it is sloped but still. And at the rear it is actually a little bit of a bigger target, so AAA can shoot you there when they try to hit between the road wheels. Another part is that while the overwhelming part of the side armor is flat, there is this part of the turret extension that holds the turret ring, so to speak, where it is heavily angled. It's still 80mm thick, but it gives you the option, or rather the enemy the option to hit you there with an APHE shell from the front, where the angle is neglected. Here we have around about 100mm, whereas here we have nearly 200mm, just to give you an idea. On the other hand, this might be the reason when you hit like here or here that you don't get through despite hitting the side armor, so keep that in mind. It is symmetrical on the other side, the same. No spaced armor, however. The rear is just 45mm thick, or here again 20 at the bottom. The turret front is, well, near the gun it is rather flat, so 240mm here, so don't shoot exactly next to the gun. Shoot from the machine gun ports onward a little bit outwards, and you have a better chance of penetrating it with conventional ammunition. So even the long 88 has here a decent chance of going through. It's more or less symmetrical. And as usual for Russian turrets, at a certain part it begins to being heavily angled and sloped, so if you hit it somewhere in this region, it will just bounce. Now, the main weak spot here is actually more in the middle of the turret. You can see that there is actually a slight shot trap going on, but it's not as big as, for example, the T-54-47. The gun mantle itself, don't shoot there. You might get through, but there is a much bigger chance that the shell just disappears somewhere. And then, yeah, the roof 60 and 30 millimeters, there is no real weak spot. The cupola is a target, but the hittable part where you might penetrate is such a tiny target, I would not really try it. And then you also can just exploit it with APHE, so don't try it. I was never killed with that. It's a bigger target on a T-54 in my opinion. Yeah, so that's the armor. Then about the top, yeah, it's 30 millimeters everywhere, so that's actually pretty good for top armor for a main battle tank. But it will not save you from rockets. The X-ray actually shows that we have a usual setup, like in the T-54s. We have the driver, the gunner, and the commander in one line. So if you shoot, for example, the upper part of the upper hull, where the driver sits, you kill the driver, the gunner, and the commander, and instant kill the tank in realistic. In arcade, it's a bit of a different story with the last man standing, but you know, the left-hand side of the tank is also very prominent. A fuel tank with a ammo rack, 20 shells are placed there, and the loader in the background. And ammunition is not just in this big ammo rack, so to speak. It's also here where there are fuel tanks right in front of the engine, and also 2 shells here in the turret. So you just have to put out some shells to overcome a turret hit, so to speak. The engine, together with the transmission and the radiators, are mounted in the back, so nothing special there. Again, you can try to hit either the left-hand side of the tank to blow up the ammunition if you hit right at the edge of the upper plate, or you can try to take out the crew members. Now, again, going back to the armor, another tip would be to land hash somewhere here. It will not go through the turret, but it will splash down through this 30 millimeters of roof armor, so to speak. And when we then look at here, it kills the ammunition and the driver. This also works with high caliber HE ammunition. Funnily enough, while the T-62 has not access to any kind of hash ammunition, its own HE shell is theoretically strong enough to kill itself with a turret hit. So yeah, and I think that's the part with the first 2 sections. Let's talk about the mobility. And as we can see, the mobility is not too bad. We have a 580 horsepower engine for a 37-ton tank, giving it a specific horsepower to ton ratio of 15.7. And that is, in terms of the top and high tier medium tanks or main battle tanks, not too bad. It's kind of average, to be honest. On the one end of the spectrum, we have the Chieftain with under 12. At the other end, we have the Leopard A1A1 with just under 20, and the T-62 together with the T-54-51 and the M60A1 are somewhere in between. But 15.7 horsepower to ton ratio is really not that bad. And there you can see the differences to its main opponents or its predecessor are not too big. The top speed is with 50 kilometers an hour, also not bad. It is better than the M60A1 and the Chieftain with 48 and 41 respectively, and it's as fast as its main or its predecessor, the T-54 51, but it is at least in theory significantly lower than the Leopards. And the reverse speed is, together with its predecessor, the slowest with just -7. That is rather slow, but you are backed up by a little bit of armor, so it's not as disastrous as, for example, on the German Panthers in, you know, the feel for it. The main disadvantage is that it has no neutral steering. But I think at this point we should compare it to the heavy tanks, and in comparison to other nations' heavy tanks, it shows itself that it has the weakest engine, but it is the lightest tank and has overall the best horsepower to ton ratio with also the best top speed. But the differences are you know, not too big in comparison to the T10M, and this seems to be kind of the end tech tree design for the Russians, that sometimes the heavy tanks, respectively the T10M, is more like a medium tank, and the medium tanks, especially the T-54s, behave more like you'd expect from a heavy tank. And yeah, in this scenario, you just see how strange this T-62 behaves. Overall, it is a rather slow and sluggish medium tank, especially in terms of acceleration, especially when being stocked. But it's not really neck-breaking because it's backed up by the armor. At this point, we should talk about the firepower, and let's begin with the gun stats. And the gun stats are really what sets this tank apart. At first, I will compare it to its main opponents in terms of main battle tanks and also its predecessor. And afterwards, let's have a look at how it stands up against heavy tanks. Now, at first, the caliber is the second highest with 115mm for this very unique U5TS cannon, which is the only smoothbore cannon at the moment. Its predecessor has the lowest caliber in this comparison with just 100mm, and the Chieftain has a really unique 120mm BLTK L11 gun. But it can feature the T-62, that is 40 shells, which is rather low in comparison to all other nations. But it's more than its predecessor. The reload is by far the longest, and just the T-54 has the shortest discrepance, so to speak. The turret rotation speed, again, is better than on its predecessor, but the slowest in comparison to all other nations and main battle tanks or medium tanks. And the gun depression is the same story. The worst in the comparison to all other nations with just -6 degrees, but significantly better in practice than its predecessor with just -4 degrees. So let's compare it to the heavy tanks. And again, we can see where the T-62 stands. In fact, it stands with its overall stats right between all nations' medium tanks or main battle tanks and the heavy tanks. The caliber is with 115 the lowest in this comparison. All other tanks have 120 to 128mm. The shell capacity is, yeah, the best, with the exception of the mouse, but the mouse again is a story of its own. The reload rate in this comparison is the better one, and the turret rotation speed is somewhere in the middle. While it is significantly better than the mouse, it is 1 degree shorter than the T10M, and you know, also 1 to 1.5 degrees slower than the M103 or the Conqueror. And also the gun depression is not that far off. It's better than the T10M, but not that much worse than the mouse, the M103 and the Conqueror. So again, it's in this respect better than the heavy tanks overall, but worse than the medium tanks. Now let's have a look at the really funny part, that is the ammunition. Now the first of two stock shells is the 3BM4 APDS-FS shell. It has a very high muzzle velocity of 1650 meters, which gives it a very flat trajectory. The penetration values are not that different from other nations' main battle tanks stock shells, especially the Leopard has nearly the same, and just the M60A1 stock shell is a little bit better, but the Chieftain's APDS is much better. So 295 millimeters of penetration, and even at 2000 meters we have 200 millimeters of penetration. So that's not too bad. It is very to aim, and as far as I know, this is the highest muzzle velocity in the game. And I think the T10M has the second highest with 1620 meters per second, if I remember correctly. So this is your stock shell. And how does it perform? Well, it seems to do a little bit more damage than the Leopard's stock shell, and it seems to bounce as much. It is as much unreliable, but you fire at opponents with more flat armor, and you do enough damage to cripple them or even to blow them up. Especially against Leopards, this shell is good enough. And I think this is where I have to say it. The major advantage of this tank is that it doesn't have to face other Russian tanks. I'm not quite sure how this shell would perform against other tanks. In arcade, I tried it out for a few battles. This shell was not so promising. But let's have a look at the upgraded APDS-FS shell. So the upgraded APDS-FS shell is the 3BM3, and I think somebody switched the declarations for those two shells. While it does have the same muzzle velocity, it features 350 millimeters of penetration. That feels so much better. While I don't think that I have really difficulties penetrating targets with the stock shell, it seems like that the stock shell bounces more often. This shell feels more reliable, and it feels more reliable than the Leopard shell, still more reliable than the M60A1's stock shell, but not as good as the Chieftain. So the reliability for APDS rounds seems to also come with the penetration value, which sounds kind of obvious, but on the other hand, I'm talking about not just the damage effect, but also the amount of bouncing. And bouncing has at first not to do so much with the penetration values, and I think it has to do with the caliber. Like the caliber of the APDS round, remember it's a sub-caliber shell, is directly related to the main caliber. But sadly, those stats are not revealed here in War Thunder, and so I can't directly compare them. And it's just a feeling. I have not played enough games and I did not enough testing to confirm it, but this is my first impression. So let's have a look at the next shell. The third shell type is the 30F11 high explosive shell, and it is the second stock shell type, together with the 3BM4. And I think it is worth talking a little bit about it, because it has enough high caliber nature with 115 millimeters to be actually theoretically useful. 31 millimeters of penetration might be just enough to splash down through the top roof armor of most opponents that you face. And even in arcade, you just might experiment a little bit around with it by trying to splash it under the gun of Soviet heavy tanks and other nations' medium tanks, and it might just be good enough to kill most enemy AAAs. The problem is that the muzzle velocity with 905 meters per second is rather slow. So yeah, also the reload rate and also the ammunition capacity is not quite good enough to support this idea, but in theory it is possible. The last shell type that I want to present you is the 3BK4 HeatFS shell, and in this comparison it is the slowest muzzle velocity for any HeatFS shell, and it features also the highest penetration value for any HeatFS shell in the game aside from ATGMs, with 440 millimeters of penetration at all distance. So practically it is 40 millimeters or 10% better in its penetration value than the Leopard A1A1 and also the M60 A1's heat shell, and also 10% better than the T10M's heat shell. Just think about this. And it also leaves its predecessor behind, which has 380 millimeters of penetration. Now this heat shell really feels like an upgrade in certain situations. while penetration wise you might be alright with your APDS-FS, the Heat FS just works so much better against armor, and funnily enough also multiple layered armor, additional armor, or spaced armor, which it shouldn't, but that's a different story. So this Heat FS shell is kind of an extreme. Slowest muzzle velocity, highest pen. And at this point let's compare all the ammunition types. And let's compare here all the ammunition types to all other tanks in this comparison. This time not the heavy tanks though. The T-62 has, with its APDS-FS shells, the highest muzzle velocity by actually quite a bit, with 1650 meters per second for both the stock and the upgraded APDS shell. And I cannot say how easy it is to aim this shell, especially at long distances. The penetration for the stock shell is the lowest in the comparison. Even the T-54's APDS shell is better, but the upgraded is just second after the Chieftain with 400 millimeters. Then let's go to the heat shell. Again, this time it's the other way around with the muzzle velocity. The muzzle velocity is the slowest compared to the Leopard and the M60, but the penetration is the best with 440. And then let's come to the HESH or heat or HE shell, and the T-62 has not access to any kind of HESH shell, so let's take the HE in comparison together with its predecessor. They are far off in penetration values in comparison to the Leopard M60, which have 145, and the Chieftain with 150 millimeters of HESH penetration, but the muzzle velocity is in this comparison, surprisingly enough, the highest. And now let's go to the realistic gameplay, and my first victim is here the Raketenjagdpanzer II. Now at first I will show you some scenes about how this tank actually handles overall in the battle or in certain scenes. Especially one particular fact has really baffled me: how much damage this tank can take in comparison to its predecessors, and the armor doesn't really show it. And then I missed the mouse ammo rack with the heat shell, which is, not surprising, as the heat shell has quite a significant lower muzzle velocity. I got hit by a Conqueror hard, but I've lost no crew member. I get hammered by the AAA, and I can't repair, and I get hit by a HESH shell. I'm down to 2 crew members, get hit again by the AAA all the time, he tracks me, and then I get rocketed and killed by a Chieftain from behind at the same time. So this is how much damage this tank can actually take. And yeah, you will experience it yourself. Now, granted, nobody actually shot at my ammo rack, so to speak. And this is here at Hürten Forest. Now the enemy team has really harvested our team hard, especially the Leopards, flanking hard everywhere. And I was actually the first to make a kill on this Leopard that had killed at least 3 of ours. And I'm now going to capture the cap zone. And in this respect, this tank really is kind of the spearhead that it should be. On the other hand, most of the time a T-10M takes over this role. And here I'm capturing. Now the problem with the T-62 is that most of the time it has to face the long reload rate, and then it doesn't have the ammunition. I really miss APHE on this tank. Like, if it would have APHE, it could be one of the top tanks in War Thunder. I think even a 200mm heat shell would be sufficient. Now here I try to angle my tank against this tank, but it was, not good enough. And I get penetrated by a heat shell. That takes out my gun breech and my turret rotation, or my turret drive, so to speak. And I'm also down to just 2 crew members. But I could theoretically activate my crew replenishment because I'm in a cap circle. I'm about to be repaired, and then this happens. The M60 catches the 350mm penetrating APDS-FS shell with its track, and I even did not detrack him. And this is also another gameplay here on Cologne or Advanced to the Rhine, and I got hit by an M48 and it just took out my commander. And this is significant. Now, when you usually lose your commander, you just lose its ability to, how to say it, yeah, to inspire the crew, so to speak. And then you have a longer reload, but not by much. Even in the Leopard or other tanks that have 4 crew members, if you're down to 3 crew members, it's usually not that bad. However, it seems like the reload gets enhanced so significantly on the T-62. Like you feel like you have 3 or 4 seconds longer reload instead of the 1.2 to 1.3 that you would expect according to the commander skill. And you know, that really might kick your ass more often than you'd like. Now this M48, I hit him here in the turret. Probably a deadly shot with an APHE shell, but not with the heat shell. I tried out numerous different ammunition variations, and I have to say, in most cases, the APDS-FS shell is sufficient. And I kill his gun barrel, and that means he can't shoot. Well, technically there is a trick that I will mention in another video, how to make it work, but he did not know this trick. Sayonara. And so that's my first kill. And until this point, actually nothing spectacular happened in this battle. And this is obviously a city map where the tank obviously should perform best. And you really feel that in city environment, you are a good tank. You have no disadvantage in terms of gun depression, and overall your armor is not so easy to overcome. When there is a chieftain in a city fight, its lower plate is as much as an inviting target as it is, for example, on the Conqueror or many other tanks. And I got hit again in the turret. Now I'm down to just 2 crew members. Where is he? Where is he? There he is. And the first heat shell from this guy took out another crew member of mine, so I'm down to 2. And the second one did nothing at all, surprisingly enough. And so he got killed by a T-10M, I guess. And I got shot in the rear by a Vulcan AAA. And this is again the difference in terms of armor compared to tanks like the Leopard or partially also the M60, that you have all around great armor. And I think the best part about this tank, I might have mentioned it before, is that you don't have to face other Russian vehicles or other Soviet vehicles, because against those you would have as much of a disadvantage as you would have in a Leopard in terms of firepower, even worse. Now here I got tracked in yeah, on top of this rubble, and I take out here the Leopard, and again you can see that I'm actually AAA safe from the Vulcan. Now granted, the Vulcan is not the best AAA in terms of dealing with enemy tanks, but he might have just been able to kill me if I would be in a Leopard, or at least do heavy damage to me. And I think there is another big difference. now I have to go through this long reload to put a second, more or less unnecessary shell into this other M163 Vulcan. But again, kill is a kill. And now I can retreat. Now, is this spawn camping? Yes, it is. But there is a big difference. There is nothing left on the entire map that I could kill. So the spawn is the last point where I actually could find enemy tanks. And the battle is decided, already decided. The battle is over. I'm getting here another kill. This is my 4th kill. And I think it happens very often that it is like in this situation that I just cut here out like 5 minutes of gameplay, that you have to hunt the last or one of the last few enemy players that hide, that are in planes or hide somewhere here in some triple A's, and you just waste so much time. And there you can see that actually you can damage the gun breech of the Vulcan with the machine gun when he puts up the barrel. So that's the result. 5 kills, 1 assist, 35,000 silver lines, 3,180 research points. I'm currently not researching anything. And we can see that I was just third in team with 1,711 score points with a 15% silver line booster being activated. So, and then let's go into the next match, which is another ace gameplay here on Stalingrad. And the initial scene is important to compare the mobility of the various Russian tanks. You can see me here overtaking a T-54-47. Yes, there might be the argument that he is stock, but still I get a decent difference between me and him. And there is a T-10M. And let's look at it if I can overtake this T-10M. Please notice that I am fully upgraded. I'm not fast enough to catch up to him. And then an artillery strike that was completely blindly aimed hits my track. Oh man. Now overall the mobility, how should I describe it? I mentioned it before in the comparison. Most of the time you drive around with 30 to 40 kilometers an hour, but when you're going down hills it just takes a few meters so that you can accelerate up to your top speed, and then you more or less can hold it. And I think again on muddy terrain or snowy terrain that you perform better in comparison to tanks like the M60 or the Leopard. And again, I just want to mention it. The gun depression of 6 degrees is so significantly better. It sounds like between 4, 5 and 6 degrees there is not much of a difference. But in fact, it seems like that is the cutting point between a tank with bad gun depression like the IS-4 or the T-10M and a tank with good enough gun depression, for example the Mouse, the T-62 and the Conqueror. There seems to be not too much difference between them in overall handling. And then of course there are other tanks with 9, 10 and up to 15 degrees of gun depression that perform really, really well. And that was my second kill in this battle. Now we have secured one of the 3 capture points. I'm reloaded, and this should be also your tactic. You really have to think about it, especially when you come from other top tier tanks such as the Leopard or the Chieftain, for example. You really have to train it. And look at this Mouse. He bounced. The T-10M puts 1-2 in his turret, killing all the turret crew members. I put in another shell, unnecessary in this case, and the mouse just bails out. And then I hit a Coelion on the move. People say that the German tanks are not so easy to one-hit with solid shots. I kind of disagree. You just have to know where to aim from the front when you have enough penetration. Even a King Tiger or a Yak Tiger is easily one-shottable from the front when you know where to aim. And that was my 4th kill. And now I think we have secured 2 out of the 3 capture points. The rest of my team is clearing out the rest of the map, so to speak. So there is no place for me to go except forwards. Again, try to put pressure on the enemy team. Now this battle has lasted for around about, what was it? 4 minutes, something like this. 4 kills. Captured a base point. Did not die. Did not take serious damage. This is kind of the usual theme in the T-62. But don't get overconfident. When you get overconfident, you get killed like you get killed in any other tank. But again, you just don't have to really fear enemy tanks that much. Overall, your armor is really good, I have to say. It's good. You're low profile, and well, your gun can deal with any opponent, especially when being upgraded. Your main advantage is that, again, that you don't have to face other Soviet vehicles. And that's my ace. And from this point on, I have to cut out another 6 minutes before the battle ends, because there was one guy left in an F-84 that just returned to base, and a Leopard was hiding somewhere. So let's cut it out. But let's have a look at the very end game scenario. At the very end, the F-84 gets taken out in the defensive hail of a Tu-4. And he wasted 6 minutes up until this point, just returning to base and then screwing up his attack run on a T-10M. So, and again, let's have a look at the post-battle results. 33,500 silver lines and 2,878 score points or research points. And yeah, I again was just 3rd with 1,095 score points. So I think that's the T-62 for you, a very unusual tank. I missed the APHE, but you get therefore one of the highest APDS shells in the game in the shape of an apds-fs shell, and the best performing heat shells aside from the ATGMs. And while the gun has the highest caliber, except to the Chieftain in terms of medium tanks, it has a reload rate that is more like a heavy tank. And overall, I like this tank. It's not bad to play, but the upgrade way is long and it feels kind of boring, especially after the T-54s with their really great APHE shell. If this tank would have to face Russian vehicles on a regular basis, like in Arcade, it wouldn't come off so good in comparison. But that's just my opinion. So, let me know in the comment section what you think about this tank, especially in comparison to its predecessors and other tanks of other nations. And that's it for today. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.